The race for New Mexico's open U.S. Senate seat gets fuzzier by the day. The list gets bigger on potential candidates. We have considerations, jump ins, dropouts, so tune in to. It was just 6 days ago that Senator Tom Udall from New Mexico announced that he was not going to run again for his seat in 2020. Now, 6 days later, we've got a lot of action. We had a little bit of action that I reported on a few days ago, and now the list is getting bigger and bigger as we go along, plus a little bit of controversy, some fur flying. So let's take a look. Hector Balderas was the first one out of the gate. That day that Tom Udall announced that he was not seeking re-election, Balderas put out a tweet that congratulated Tom on his years of service and said that he would not be making an announcement right away, but he was going to consult with his family and then give a decision. So 3 days later, he has a press conference at a radio station here in Albuquerque and declares that he is not going to run for office. Now, this came the day after Ben Ray Lujan had put out a story in D.C. that he was considering running for that office. And I have a feeling that there's no coincidence right there. Well, now the news comes, definitely. Ben Ray Lujan to announce New Mexico's Senate run on Monday, says roll call, and that will be tomorrow on April the 1st. The congressman from the Northern Congressional District in New Mexico setting himself up to be the front runner in this race. At least that's what the spin is right now. He is the number 4 person in the House, has been a big player in the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is called the Duopoly, which is a huge fundraising and recruiting arm for House candidates around the country. So there's no doubt that Ben Ray Lujan has a lot of ties to big money fundraising. That doesn't necessarily... It's not all good. There is some controversy about the DCCC and its tactics in the last few years about squashing potential progressive candidates around the country and whatnot. But nonetheless, he's setting himself up to in a very strong position for this race. A lot of people think that he's unbeatable. Is he unbeatable? Well, that's to be determined. Now, if nobody runs against him, that we'll never know, right? Well, there are a few people who are talking and thinking about it, at least been chatting with friends, and you know, the worst kept secret besides a military secret is a political secret. And so the whisper mill, the mitote, is all out there, and now we have the New Mexico Political Report that came out a couple days ago with the article talking about some of the potentials, and they said some high-profile political figures have either said they're considering a run or said to be considering a run are below. If we received a statement that mentioned a political run, we included it below. So you see Attorney General Hector Balderas is up there, and it has the statement that he gave congratulating Senator Udall. This was, prior to him saying that he was not going to run again. Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, she said the future in politics and life is often unpredictable, but my commitment to serving people of New Mexico is unwavering. As a result, every decision I make will be about my work for our state and will be based on how I can best use my skills and expertise to move New Mexico forward. Ben Ray Lujan, as we mentioned, and then U.S. Representative Deb Holland from the Albuquerque Metro District, who said, "Thank you for your love and encouragement. New Mexico, I hear you, and I'm giving this Senate race a lot of thought and consideration. I'll let you know when we have news to share." That's a pretty strong statement. They also go to list former gubernatorial candidate Jeff Apodaca and 2nd Judicial District Attorney Raul Torres. 2nd Judicial District is Bernalillo County, Albuquerque, the biggest county in the state of New Mexico. It also states that Democracy for America, a liberal group, told the New Mexico Political Report that Holland and Toulouse Oliver have strong profiles with progressives in New Mexico, maybe signaling that there is some potential support for a more progressive candidate than Ben Ray Lujan. If they can come to a decision on that Ben Ray Lujan may not get a free ride on this. So here's Congresswoman Deb Holland, and she is the first-term Congresswoman from New Mexico. Now, usually you wouldn't think of a first-term congressperson jumping then immediately to running for U.S. Senate, but a U.S. Senate seat does not come completely open just every day. Senator Tom Udall served for 10 years. There have been other times where senators have served even longer. So although Deb has recently entered into the Congress, and it may not be typical to run again, by the time another U.S. Senate seat comes completely clean, it'll be a long ways away. And so, sometimes timing is a weird thing, and you have to make decisions and take opportunities as they come. So I'm sure that Congresswoman Holland is considering that right now and trying to figure out what the best move is. A signal that she's running also is a signal saying that Ben Ray Lujan may not have the statewide support that he thinks he has. He may have a great source of money and he can build upon that, but that if someone from the metro area runs, well, that immediately dials down the potential that he could have just out of the gate. So Congresswoman Holland running, along with her years of work in campaigns throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, especially in the native lands of New Mexico, combined with the metro, can give her a base of support that potentially creates a good amount of votes. So I think that's why she's in the race. And to sort of lock that down, if you do a search, we found that HollandForSenate.com was purchased on the 29th, just 2 days ago. And so that URL has been locked down. And so you don't do that unless you're seriously thinking about a run. So that's some more evidence. Now we got Maggie Toulouse Oliver, our current New Mexico Secretary of State. She's been noted. She's won some recent awards for her work as Secretary of State and County Clerk before that in pushing election reform measures. She's been out there in front on the latest bill that passed that gave us same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration. She actually was helpful in the struggle for open primaries, which did not come to pass. And seen as someone who, at least in the roles of county clerk and secretary of state, definitely was into the process, was into pushing elections systems forward, creating more openness and transparency, and that's a lot of pluses on her side. So Secretary of State to U.S. Senate is probably not as typical as something like AG to U.S. Senate, like Hector Balderas. Of course, that doesn't mean it can't be done. But now, looking with Ben Ray Lujan in the race, possibly Deborah Holland, and who knows what else. Of course, people like to weigh in. You start talking to friends, or sometimes you get unsolicited advice. And it looks like a few days ago, some unsolicited advice was coming in that was not welcome. I don't have the clip here, but there was a Facebook post that she posted that basically said she's tired of hearing from white Anglo-Saxon men telling her what to do, especially if it's in the area of being negative and saying, don't do something. And a real clear reference to that we know that occurred is that Greg Payne, just 2 days ago, reacted to that and said, wow, politicians who want your advice after they lose an election they shouldn't have, and then they win the next one after they listen to you, but turn around and whine on Facebook about Anglo-Saxon males when you tell them something they don't want to hear, like, hypothetically speaking, don't run against Ben Ray Lujan for U.S. Senate. Interesting. Just kidding. Not interested, actually. Greg Payne is a political strategist, someone who's been around for a long, long time. I know Greg personally. Many times he has a lot of spot on analysis of New Mexico politics, and many times when he's made predictions, done his punditry is amazingly accurate. So it looks like there may have been a personal conversation here, one that was not as well received by Maggie Toulouse Oliver. It's kind of troubling that there was a little freak out so early in the thing. Freakouts occur with candidates and campaigns, but usually a lot closer to election day. The fact that a freak out happened already means that there might have to be some real figuring out what to do fast here, and about what kind of tack that the Maggie Toulouse Oliver campaign may take. Nonetheless, just like Deb Holland, someone did a search and said that, hey, every Maggie for Senate URL is gone. And the proof of that here is that on the 29th, maggieforsenate.org was purchased. And also, Maggie Toulouse Oliver for Senate.com, as a veteran web designer, database manager, Andrew Taylor, found and posted on Facebook. So again, you don't do this unless you're seriously considering. So Maggie Toulouse Oliver definitely has to be taken into consideration as a serious potential. One name that's not mentioned, that I mentioned on the previous video, is Giovanni Alexander Haqqani. I posted about his Facebook post where he's forming an exploratory committee. So he's already basically announced as well that he's more than just considering, he's already forming the exploratory committee. So his name is definitely on there. In terms of Raul Torres or Jeff Apodaca, I haven't seen anything publicly. Raul Torres is sort of a bright shining star in the Albuquerque metro area, although there's been some controversy there. Jeff Apodaca just ran a governor's race and lost in the primary to Michelle Lujan Grisham, but has maintained his contact in the political world. And I'm sure that he's, if the name isn't said for no reason at all. So the New Mexico Political Report continues to talk about people other than Democrats. And the list that has come up so far is former U.S. Representative Steve Pearce, who's currently the head of the state New Mexico GOP. One wonders if Steve Pearce wants to strike out for a third time on the statewide level. Former Lieutenant Governor John Sanchez. John Sanchez has been mentioned many times for higher statewide offices, and one wonders if that may not be what's going to happen. I think the GOP feels in New Mexico a lot of times they want a Hispanic to be running on their ticket to get more votes than they might normally. Another name is former U.S. Senate candidate Mick Rich. Mick Rich said, like everyone, I'm done with politicians who think their wealth or family name entitle them to elected office. And that's a reference to Ben Ray Lujan, who's the son of the state legislative House Speaker Ben Lujan, who was a very powerful figure in New Mexico politics for a long time. And now you have Ben Ray Lujan. You also have Michelle Lujan Grisham. And I guess he's got Lujan PTSD going on with this statement. I'm done with hateful identity politics that divide our communities by race and faith, and that distract New Mexicans from real needs. Good paying jobs, safe communities, and an education system that works for our children. Whether or not I decide to run, I'll work tirelessly for our shared vision of prosperous, healthy, strong New Mexico. That was his statement. Former Secretary of State Gavin Clarkson is also mentioned in that list. As of the writing of the New Mexico Political Reports article, there was no mention of a Libertarian Party candidate. That doesn't mean there will be one, won't be one. But as of right now, that's all they've got. So then that's kind of the gamut of what we've got. Now, in terms of John Sanchez, Mick Rich, I actually think that in Mick Rich's statement, there's a little evidence that there might be a little bit of bristling about the idea that I talked about just a second ago about the GOP wanting to lean on Hispanic candidates to try to get more votes. But also, Mick, the last race that you ran against Martin Heinrich and Gary Johnson for U.S. Senate was pretty much of a disaster. And maybe the Libertarians will not have someone like a Gary Johnson running on their ticket, but I have to tell you that the output was not very impressive. So I'm actually thinking that he's lower on the list. Or if he's picked, it's really a sign of how thin the GOP bench is for these statewide races. I'm sure there's more to come. I'll keep you posted as we go along here. I have a feeling this is far from over, and there may be some names that we haven't even considered that may jump into this race. Until then, thank you for tuning in.